Hello and welcome to Bulimia Sucks. I'm your host, Kate Hudson Hall, and thank you so much for listening. So this is a platform for people to share relatable, uplifting, and inspiring conversations based on an eating disorder. And episodes include the people that are actually going through an eating disorder and their own personal struggles and their difficult steps taken on their recovery path, and how they're doing, how well they're doing, and also to people that work with people with eating disorders. So it's very exciting. Now, I have been busy creating coloring books. So I have 4 coloring books, and there is one for bulimia, one for anorexia, and one for binge eating, but also one for anxiety relief. And there's 35 plus pages, and they've got a quote on each page, which has a mandala, and then the quote, which is a positive quote to get you thinking. And then on the opposite page, there is 1 or 2 questions about that quote that you can learn about yourself with that quote, and how maybe you could think about life a little differently, how you could take a step forward in your recovery somehow. So it's very exciting, because I think they are very powerful to help people, because not only, with the quotes and the questions, but take your mind away from listening to the negative thoughts and focusing on the coloring. You're going to be giving yourself a break. It's a way to practice a form of mindfulness by solely focusing on those colors that you're coloring in. So that is what has been going on. So I am very excited to welcome our guest, Christina Castagnini. Now, Christina holds a Ph.D. in counseling and psychology, and she is an eating disorders specialist and has her own practice working with children, teens, and adults who have eating disorders. Christina feels she's worked with enough patients over the years to know that once they get that information, once they gain that knowledge and awareness, things can start to change. But they need to hear it first. I love that. I think that's really insightful. So what she did was she set up a podcast, and it's called Behind the Bite, where a real doctor who truly recovered from an eating disorder talks about actual struggles with food, body image, and weight. So Christina's here today to share her wealth of knowledge and her own experience with her eating disorder. So Christina, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is exciting. And I love your coloring books. They sound really great. So I'll have to check those out. Yeah.
So thank you. So where to begin? So should we maybe start with when you had your struggles with food?
Sure. And I hate almost sharing my story, because part of my podcast is breaking the myths about eating disorders. And I know one of the myths is, teenage Caucasian females and typically are the only ones who have eating disorders, of a middle class, status. And here I am talking about it going, okay, I was 12 years old. I'm Caucasian. I'm a female, this is when it all started. And so I don't want to perpetuate that myth. Right. But that just happens to be my case. So anyone listening, just because I kind of fit that mold doesn't mean that myth perpetuates. It just, anybody can have an eating disorder. It doesn't matter age, race, gender, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation. It just doesn't matter. They're non-discriminatory. But I was 12, and I guess about 11 almost, it really started. So I think that's the time I felt really out of control with so many things.
Right.
Puberty was happening, so my body felt really out of control. I was getting boobs and my body was getting larger in areas I wasn't used to it getting larger in. And that felt really awkward to me.
Yeah. And it's such it's such an uncomfortable time because you don't really understand what's going on with your body.
No. And I'd already had issues with my body since I was born. Essentially, I was born with 2 birthmarks that were abnormal birthmarks. They had to be studied, I guess. So I went to a local University of UCSF. I'm over in California.
Right.
And so I remember being from a very young age, just doctors in white coats, like staring at me, bright lights, cameras. So it was something I did, a couple times a year just to go have people like look at my birthmarks. And I didn't know what was going on. All I knew was something was wrong with my body and I had to go be studied, and you had to look at me and figure out how to fix me. And so I was very self-conscious and aware that my body had something wrong with it from a very young age, like I said.
Right, yeah.
And I don't know, I've thought back about this. I remember my mom making it the trip into the city. We called it was about a 40-minute trip or so. She tried to make it special. We'd go get a cookie after, so I always associated the trip with like, oh, okay, but I get my cookie after, and they were fancy cookies, right? It was a special thing. So, there's this perfect storm here. So the birthmark was on my shoulder. And so I was very aware of people making comments. It looked like a burn, and people would ask me, oh my gosh, were you in a burn? So I always covered it up, and I never wore, cute little tops, or like every time we went to swim parties, I was so self-conscious. And here it comes the time when like all my friends are wearing cute little tops and like tank tops. And then my aunt asked me to be in her wedding and to be a junior bridesmaid. And we have a huge Italian family. I mean, lots and lots of people, hundreds of people are going to be at this wedding. And she showed me the dress, and it was a strapless dress. And I went, oh my gosh, I'm going to be walking down the aisle with hundreds of eyeballs on me. And I'm like, I'm 11 at this time when she's telling me I was going to be 12. And I'm going, my body feels out of control. I'm wearing a strapless dress in front of hundreds of people. And oh my gosh, like this is, wow. Like this was a bad idea. So this was the start of me going, I got to do something. And so, back then we didn't have the internet. All we had was magazines and TV commercials. And I remember going in the magazine and looking and seeing ads for Slim Fast. And
seeing what?
Advertisements for Slim Fast, which was like a diet drink.
Yes.
And I remember I had been babysitting in the neighborhood, and I had some money from that. I ran down to the local store and I bought some Slim Fast with my own money because I didn't want to tell my parents, and I hid it in my room. And that was the start of me really trying to control my weight through my food and what I was eating.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you were 12 then?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Oh gosh.
So really young. And I my daughter just turned 13. So now I'm looking at her going, gosh, I was so young when I started this. Like that is so scary, right? Oh my gosh. And I just think, gosh, I hope she never, ever has to deal with anything like that, So, from that point forward, it just got worse and worse because what happened was people said things like, wow, you look great.
As they do.
And that was like, initially that felt fantastic, right? Mm. And then when they didn't say anything after the initial comments, I was like, oh gosh, why are they not saying anything? Well, did I gain weight? Did I not look good? Like maybe if I lose more, they'll say something else, right? So it just got this thing in my head of like, wait, I want to feel those compliments again. I want people to say something like, what does it mean that they're not? And so, it was just so confusing. And so I just tried so many things. It went beyond Slim Fast. I kind of went into, I was also an athlete that's at the time playing sports year round. And so it got really dicey with me needing to have food for energy for performance, but then I didn't want to eat because I was afraid of gaining weight. And so I would try all sorts of interesting things with myself of fine, I'll eat, but then I got to get rid of it. because I was so hungry after a game or something. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to eat. And as people who've had an eating disorder will probably understand this. It's like for every restrictive phase, you have almost a binge phase. It's like your body just needs to eat and you feel so out of control with the eating.
Yes.
And for me, I felt extreme guilt after that. And I said, okay, how can I eat but not have the guilt? And I decided to try some things. So I tried laxatives. I tried self-induced vomiting. I tried over-exercising. I tried fasting for a couple of days after I ate what I considered a lot. It was just years of either restricting or binging and feeling guilty, or binging and then, purging of some sort. So I was just all over the place. So when people ask which eating disorder did you have? I'm like, I think I tinkered with them all, unfortunately, at any given point in time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I always say that I had bulimia, but I also had anorexia. I was restricting. I never went down over exercising, but I had, I would take laxatives. There was a time when I was taking laxative, and you just hop from one thing to another. And then so Christina, so with regards to going through that, all of those different horrific experiences, what kind of brought you to the point where you decided that you were going to maybe change some patterns in your life?
Well, there was, I call this my moment. I was living by myself at the time, and I went to a health food store and I bought it was called a detox, right? And at that time, during my disorder, I have to say, I'd been in and out of treatment, but in my mind, I always told myself, I just keep failing at dieting. I was in so much denial, right? And so here I go get a detox, telling myself, I just want to cleanse myself of toxins. No, it was really, if I'm being honest, I wanted to try to lose more weight, right? And it was the first night I tried this detox. I was just drinking a bunch of herbal stuff. I'm not even sure what was in it, to be honest with you. I woke up in the middle of the night so thirsty, the thirstiest I've ever been, but I was also clammy and nauseous. And I remember running from my bedroom to the kitchen, just needing to turn the faucet on to get water. That's all I thought about was I need water.
Gosh.
And I remember the microwave was next to the sink and it had a digital time on it. And it was 2 or 3 a.m. And the next thing I know, that's all I remember. The next thing I know, I'm on my back on the floor, facing away from the microwave. My head is pounding. I have vomit all over me. The sun is shining on my head. And I'm like, whoa,
oh my God,
what is going on? And I mean, it took a while for me to come to, because my head hurt and I was kind of loopy. But I had lost probably 5 or 6 hours. I think it was 8 or 9 a.m. And I went, oh my gosh. And this was also my birthday.
Oh no.
Right. I'm like, oh, happy birthday to me. And I was supposed to be at work and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just had this freak out moment. What just happened? So I remember calling my friend and telling her what was going on. And she was such a wonderful person. She drove me to the ER and they did EKGs, a head scan. They did all these things. And I don't know how, but they said, you're quote unquote fine to go home, but it scared me. That really, really scared me. For the first time, I really had major, an effect from what I had done. So that was my turning point to okay, I'm really going to get into treatment now. This is no joke.
Yeah. Yeah. So what did you do? What sort of treatment did you look at?
Well, I didn't know what to do, but I ended up asking around and saying, where's an eating disorder treatment center? Where's the I need a specialist. And that's what I had a team. I had a nutritionist, a psychiatrist, and an eating disorder specialist. And I think one of the most powerful parts for me of that was actually going with my nutritionist out to places to eat and eat my fair foods with her. So she could talk me through why pizza's not scary, or pasta, or like all these things I hadn't allowed myself to eat for years. And I'm not saying it was easy. I remember going to pizza the first time, and like it took me the longest time to walk in there. I was like, I hadn't had pizza, and I didn't even know how long at that point. And it took like 2 hours to eat my first piece of pizza, because I was like, this is the scariest food ever. Like, but she talked me through each part and like what it was and how it was useful in my body and what my body did with it. And, you know, slowly over time, I started to see food as something that fueled my body and provided me nutrition, and not like something that just caused me to gain weight and I had to burn off. So my relationship, you know, changed over time. So that was very helpful.
Wow. And so what do you feel was the most helpful out of all the different help that you had?
Oh, you know, I'll be honest with you, opening up about it.
Really?
Stop keeping everything held inside. I was so secretive, and I was just, in my word right now, sneaky. You know, I wasn't telling anybody what was going on. But people knew, you know, I decline invitations to go to places, or I'd say, oh, you know, I already ate when we got to restaurants. I hadn't, you know, like I had weird behaviors, and people could tell I was just weird to be around. But once I opened up, people were like, oh, that explains it, you know?
Yeah. And
I think, you know, I tell my patients all the time, and I say it on the podcast, you're only as sick as your secrets. Yeah. And that's part of the reason I wanted to do the podcast too, is get the word out there, get the information out there, because I thought back to when I was in the you know, deepest, darkest place of my eating disorder. I didn't know anyone else who had one. At least no one was talking about it. And maybe if I'd had a podcast like yours or mine, or, you know, where other people were opening up and sharing about what they were doing, I would have been like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe I'm not just a failed diet, or maybe I do have something wrong with me.
Yeah,
maybe,
absolutely. You know? And actually knowing that you're not alone with it.
Exactly.
And that there is possibility that you can actually recover from it.
That's exactly it, right? Hearing other people and going, wait, they're as bad as me, or like doing the same things as me, and now they're talking about how they have a different life and they don't do these things anymore. What? That's possible? Like, it didn't even cross my mind that living a different way was possible, right?
Yeah.
I just thought, this is it, right? So I think that to me is was a big eye opener of like, I wish I would have been able to hear somebody else tell me I could get past this and have a different life.
Yeah. Yeah. Because when I was in the depths of it, I didn't know anybody, because it was such a secretive, you know, disorder anyway. But any sort of eating disorder, you know, was never talked about, because it was it was actually in the 1800s. And it was just so lonely. And, you know, with Facebook and all the different eating disorders groups that there are out there, and the podcasts and, you know, powerful books, there's so much help out there. But just to hear other people say this is what they went through, and that they have been able to turn their life around, and that people can do that as well. Mm-hmm. It's not like we have some sort of magical power. It's taking those very small, you know, step by step, and learning how you can begin to change.
I think that's so true, because it can feel overwhelming. Like, it seems like a big, massive hurdle, right? Like, how on earth are you going to go from where you're at to recovered? But to hear story after story after story of real people going, wait a minute, like, they've all done it. I can do it too. It's not just like a celebrity or some magical person you don't know. Like, if you keep hearing the stories, it can become like, you know, a reality.
Yeah. And I think when I was, I still had bulimia, but it was when Princess Diana, when she spoke out about her eating disorder, it's when people were like, oh my gosh, you know, we can all start to talk about it. Not that everybody did, especially in England, but you know, it was just such a prevalent moment, I think, that she actually had the courage in her situation to be able to do that. That was so powerful.
Oh, sure.
Anyway, so now then you, so tell us what happened in your journey, and then how I want to hear about, different ideas and thoughts and patterns of how you help your clients with eating.
Well, so like fast forward a bit. Like as you mentioned, I have my doctorate in psychology, and so I ended up getting past all my schooling and dissertation and getting licensed to be a psychologist. And I never wanted to treat eating disorders for one reason. I had this idea in my head that there's people say like, oh, all therapists or psychologists bring their own issues into the room with their patients and make it about them. So I said, you know what, I'm not going to touch this one issue. I don't want anyone ever accusing me of bringing my own stuff into the room. So I'm not going to do that. What ended up happening, I'm working at a hospital, and we have to take whatever comes in the door at a hospital, right? Whoever comes in for an intake, that's it. But always assess for depression. And one of the symptoms of depression is either you have increased appetite or decreased appetite. So as I was getting to that symptom with people, interesting things started to come out about their behaviors with food and eating more, eating less, and how long that's been going on. And I started to get more in depth and going, oh my gosh, they have, like, I call it ED, eating disorder, ED in their head. They're like, this is eating disorder talk. This is not people who don't have an eating disorder, right?
Yeah.
What I was hearing was, it's different. It's not the same, right?
Yeah.
And I just remember connecting with them on such a level, because they're like, wait, you understand this?
Yeah.
And, and then it slowly started to suggest to people, like, have you ever thought that this was a problem? And, I remember people saying to me, like, I've been in counseling before and I've always been here for depression, but nobody's ever asked me about this. It's such a stressful thing. I'm so tired of this. And remember the very first patient that happened with, like, she just looked at me and she just breathed, oh, thank God you get it. And I went,
what a huge pivotal moment there.
And I went, oh, okay. But that kept happening. And then I kept thinking to myself, I wasn't in and out of treatment for so long. And even at the last bout of treatment that, I got into recovery with, I never had anybody look at me and say, I get it. I've been there. Like, it's stressful. It's hard, but you can recover, because I did. Like, if I had had that, I think that would have really helped me. And so I thought, okay, maybe I got to rethink this. Maybe I want to be the psychologist or the therapist that can look at somebody and say, been there, I get it, I'm recovered, I know you can do it because I did it. So, instill that hope.
Yeah.
And
truly
so
understand, it's like an underlying connection.
Yeah, because I think if people haven't had an eating disorder to understand what the thoughts about, like, I remember people would say, like, wow, you look healthy. And I go, oh my gosh. And like, to me, that was a huge trigger. Like, they're telling me I gained weight. and that just triggered me into restriction. And someone who hasn't had an eating disorder doesn't get that. Like, what do you mean? I'm just being nice. Or like, they look great. Like, don't say that.
Yeah.
It's like those kinds of little things that, another therapist might say to a patient, like, hey, you look great, you look healthy. And that could be the kiss of death. Like, they might not come back.
They would have no idea what they just said to them.
Right.
And how they'd sent them back down, 25 steps backwards or whatever.
So long story short, all these years later, I got certified as an eating disorder specialist. I started the outpatient eating disorder program in my clinic at the hospital. And, I was there for 15 years, like I said, and decided I wanted to do bigger, better, have more impact. So I left about a little over 2 years ago and said, if I'm going to leave, I want to do something very different. So I started my private practice, and like you, started a podcast a little over a year ago because I wanted to break all those myths out there and get the right information out there about eating disorders.
Yeah.
So like you had mentioned, the podcast is a mix. I have professionals on there to give the right information because there's like with the internet, there's so much junk information. There's so much that's out there that I think perpetuates eating disorders and has people thinking all sorts of interestingly wrong ways about food and diet and exercise and all these things. But like you, I want to have people on there who are real and can share their story. And, I'm grateful when they're vulnerable and coming on, because that takes a lot of courage to come out and talk about their eating disorder and their journey and getting to recovery and all their struggles. So I hope as whoever listening can go, okay, and relate and hopefully give them a little bit of a push to go get treatment themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And what else would you say to somebody that is thinking about stepping on that pathway to recovery? What words of guidance would you give them?
I would definitely say choose your providers wisely. I think finding a specialist is key. Because there's a difference. It's just, we don't look at it like that in mental health, unfortunately, like we do with medicine. If you have cancer, you don't go to a podiatrist. If you have an eating disorder, you don't go to just a generalist. You need to go to a specialist because this is a very specialized illness. It's very nuanced. It's the most deadly mental illness, so that to me is like, you don't want to risk your life over this. And I think if you have an experience with treatment that you don't feel goes well, sometimes people just, forget it. Counseling doesn't work. Treatment doesn't work. I'm out, and then they don't try again. So choose a provider wisely.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really important that you find somebody that you feel completely comfortable with, that you can open up with. And, that first person that you found may not be right. And that's okay, And so it's just persevering with that.
Right. And not telling yourself you're the failure, right? Because treatment takes a long time. And I don't know for you how long your journey was, but getting over an eating disorder, getting treatment for this is not like a 5-session deal. There's deep-seated stuff that's going on. And, it's not about the food. People think it's about the food, or once I'm following my meal plan, I'm done. And I'll be honest with you, once you're following your meal plan, if you are given one, that's just the start. That's just getting your body, stable. It's like, I call it training wheels. You're just getting on the path to learning how often to eat, how much to eat, what foods you like, how your body responds to food, normalizing the amounts, all that kind of stuff. That's not treatment. That's like, you don't want to be on a meal plan.
Yeah.
Right.
There's so much underlying that needs to be addressed, that hasn't been talked about, that needs to be unraveled and worked through and talked about. Yeah. I remember when I was in the depths of my eating disorder, and I just had no idea what was going on with me. I knew I was making myself sick or restricting, but I didn't know. I just thought I was insane. And it's just, if I had some sort of guidance and knowledge, or, a podcast or a Facebook group to be able to hear other people's stories, to know I'm not alone, and also to understand that I am not insane. It's the disease that I have.
And I think you're so wise to say that about, if you had it nowadays, there's the internet. And, one word of caution is, I think there are some groups or some websites or forums on the internet that claim to be eating disorder support groups, but they're actually doing some harm. So make sure whatever sites you're on or whatever information you're getting, for anyone who's listening, like it's maybe from an eating disorder like recovery center, or like make sure that it's like actually eating disorder treatment or counselor that's providing that help and that information. Because if it can be under the guise of, we call it like a pro-ana website, pro-anorexia website. They're giving information out that is so wrong and actually promotes eating disorders. And that's the scary thing for me, is like being able to tease out what's what.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's incredible words of wisdom to make sure that you are on a kosher place, in a safe place. So finally, Christina, so people can come listen to your podcast, and where would they go to listen to that? Is it on all the major platforms?
It is, and I also have a website that has it on there. Like all the podcasts are on there, but links to like say Apple, Spotify, Pandora, all the ones you people go to. And the website is behindthebitepodcast.com.
Excellent. Excellent. If people were interested in contacting you to find out more about how you help clients, how would they do that?
So if they go to the website, there's something that's there that says you can contact me, you can email me, goes directly to my inbox, and I get all of them. So if you want to reach out to me, I will respond to myself, or you can go to my Instagram, Behind the Bite, and you can DM me there too. So
yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Well, Christina, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I think the work you're doing is fantastic. So thank you. And like I said, those coloring books, great. Well, we're doing the same kind of work. So, hopefully there's enough of us to get the right information out there. So
yeah, absolutely. So thank you for sharing such valuable, important information with us. So
well, thank you,
Christina. So that's all for today's episode of Bulimia Sucks. And thank you to everybody for listening. And make sure you join our Facebook group called Bulimia Sucks if you haven't already. Like we were saying, it's great to connect with like-minded people and chat about our ups and downs. So come join us. And that's all for today's episode. And I look forward to speaking with you in the next episode.